My name is Luna Bennett, and I was born into a legacy. My family owns a respected winery in Napa Valley, California, Bennett Cellars. It's been in the family for 3 generations, and since I was little, I was told that I would be the one to carry the name forward. My father, Richard Bennett, made that clear every time he held my hand and walked me through the vineyard rows, showing me how to feel the soil, how to read the grapes. "One day this will all be yours," he'd whisper, and I believed him. I wasn't the only one growing up under the Bennett name, though. My cousin Carla, my uncle's daughter, was always around too. Our families lived close, and we were raised almost like sisters, but Carla was different. She was loud, attention-seeking, and always needed to be the star of the room. Where I was quiet and observant, she was bold and dramatic. As kids, it was small things. If I got a compliment, she'd interrupt with a joke or a story to turn the spotlight back to herself. At first, I thought it was just childhood insecurity, but as we got older, the competition became more obvious, though unspoken. Carla went into PR and media, I studied business and viticulture. I wanted to understand our product from the ground up. Carla wanted to sell the image, the story. It was clear she didn't care about the process or the tradition. Just the shine. Still, I didn't mind. I stayed in my lane, worked hard, and waited for my turn. By the time I graduated and came back to help with the business, my dad had started slowing down. He wasn't sick yet, but he was tired. The long harvest seasons and endless meetings had taken their toll, so he handed over more responsibility to me. I started managing small parts of the operations, learning the ropes directly from him. That's when Carla's tone started changing. She used to laugh and say things like, "Luna's the golden girl," but there was a bite behind it now. She'd make jokes in front of staff like, "Guess nepotism still works." People would laugh, awkwardly, but I felt it. The digs, the disapproval. I brushed it off. I told myself we were family. I thought she'd come around. I had no idea that Carla wasn't just envious. She was already planning to destroy everything I had worked for, and everything my father promised would one day be mine. It all started to unravel the summer my dad got sick. He had just turned 62 when he began to feel unusually tired. At first, we all thought it was just age catching up to him. But then came the weight loss, the coughing, and the night sweats. One afternoon, after a short walk through the vineyard, he collapsed in the driveway. That's when we knew something was seriously wrong. The diagnosis came fast and hard, stage 3 lung cancer. It felt like the air had been sucked out of our lives. My dad, the pillar of our family and the backbone of our business, suddenly became fragile. I dropped everything and stepped in. Hospital appointments, business meetings, supplier calls, I did it all. Not because I had to, but because I couldn't imagine letting him down. Carla, to her credit, offered to help, at first. She said all the right things, brought him flowers, posted praying for Uncle Richard's selfies on Instagram, but she never stayed longer than 20 minutes at the hospital. And she never missed a moment to remind people how Luna's taking over everything now. I didn't care about the attention, I cared about my dad. I just wanted to keep things running smoothly while he fought for his life. But then things started to shift. I'd walk into meetings and feel a weird tension in the room. Longtime employees, people who had watched me grow up, were suddenly distant. One of the vineyard managers avoided eye contact. Another muttered something under his breath when I asked about an irrigation issue. Something wasn't right. Then I heard about the rumors. Someone had been telling people I was using my dad's illness to grab power, that I was cutting costs recklessly, firing people behind closed doors, even mishandling the books. At first, I laughed. It sounded ridiculous. But it didn't stop. The whispers grew louder. Clients started pulling out of events. A wine distributor canceled a big order. Even some family members, my aunt and one cousin, began treating me with suspicion. And yet, whenever I tried to trace where the stories came from, the trail always went cold. Until one day an assistant accidentally forwarded me an internal email thread. Carla had mistakenly copied my address. The thread included not just sarcastic jokes about me, but also screenshots of private staff messages and a proposal she'd drafted titled "Leadership Contingency Plan If Luna Fails." That's when I realized this wasn't passive aggression. This was war. The betrayal hit harder than I expected. I stared at the email chain for a long time, my hands shaking, heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't just being gossiped about. I was being targeted, undermined. And not by some outsider, but by my own cousin. The girl who used to braid my hair and laugh with me under the vineyard sun had just drafted a plan for my professional downfall. What hurt most wasn't the ambition. It was the cruelty, the mockery. Carla hadn't just questioned my ability, she had made me a joke, a liability, someone to be replaced. I didn't respond to the email. I didn't confront her, not yet. I knew that if I was going to survive this, I had to be smart, careful. I started documenting everything, meetings, conversations, changes in staff behavior. I even began recording calls with vendors who mentioned, "We heard things are unstable over there." The company was still standing, but the foundation was cracking beneath me. Then came the mistake that nearly destroyed me. A shipment of our best-sellered Pinot Noir, reserved for an exclusive event in San Francisco, was flagged for contamination. The bottles were leaking slightly, labels smudged, and the corks improperly sealed. I had personally overseen the batch and knew everything had passed quality checks before leaving the facility. But Carla was already on it. She found the problem, sent a panicked email to the entire staff, and within hours it was all over social media. "Bennett Cellars under fire for faulty bottles," read one headline. Photos of damaged wine, side by side with my name and title, spread across wine blogs and local news. I knew this wasn't just bad luck, this had been orchestrated. And it worked. I was called into a board meeting 2 days later. My uncles and aunts sat stiffly in silence, while one cousin read off a statement. "Until further notice, all executive duties will be transferred to Carla Bennett, for the sake of the company's image and operational stability." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I tried to explain, tried to ask for time, for investigation, for fairness. But no one looked me in the eye. Not even my father, too weak from chemo, his eyes dull from medication. He said nothing. I walked out of that room not just humiliated but erased. The girl meant to carry the family name was being written out of the story. But I wasn't going to let that be the final chapter. I stayed in bed for 3 days after that board meeting. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the ceiling, numb. Everything I had worked for, my education, my sleepless nights, my loyalty to the family, had been dismissed with a single statement. It wasn't just the job they took away. They took away my voice, my place, my identity. People talk about betrayal like it's a moment, a knife in the back, but sometimes it's slower, like drowning in shallow water. Every text Carla didn't respond to, every meeting she forgot to invite me to, every whisper I ignored, it had all been leading to this. And yet, the silence from my father hurt most of all. Even in his fragile state, I thought he'd say something. Call me after the meeting, look for me. But nothing. I told myself he was too sick, too tired, but a small voice inside kept asking, did he believe them? On the 4th day, I got out of bed and drove. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to breathe. I ended up at the original Bennett Vineyard, the one my grandfather built with his bare hands before the family expanded. It hadn't been used in years, but the land was still there. The old barn, the worn-out sign, and somehow the silence of that place felt honest. More honest than any meeting room I'd sat in lately. I sat on the porch steps and let myself feel it all. The loss, the anger, the humiliation. But something else too. Resolve. They thought they had pushed me out. But I still carried the name, the knowledge, the truth. That night, I went home and opened my laptop. I started making a list. Not of enemies, but of facts. What I knew. What I'd seen. Who had said what, and when. I wasn't going to fight this with drama or public shaming. That would only make me look bitter. No. If I was going to take back what was mine, I had to be strategic. Clean. Focused. Because here's the thing no one seemed to realize. They underestimated me. And that's the most dangerous mistake you can make with someone who has nothing left to lose. I didn't come back to fight. I came back to win. But to win, I had to stop thinking like a daughter and start thinking like a CEO. The next few weeks were quiet, but not because I was gone. I was watching, listening, gathering. Every connection I'd built over the years, vendors, former employees, even old harvest workers, I reached out to them. Not with drama, not with tears, just with questions. And I started hearing things. One supplier told me Carla had rushed an order from a cheaper bottling company the same week the Pinot Noir disaster happened. Another said Carla insisted on skipping the final quality checks to save time. A former intern forwarded me a group chat where Carla openly bragged about cleaning house and getting Luna out of the way. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. But I needed more than gossip. I needed proof. So I hired a private auditor, quietly, discreetly. I asked her to look through inventory orders, shipment records, payroll activity, anything that could explain what was really going on. What she found stunned even me. Carla had been funneling money from the marketing budget into a separate event planning LLC, one she owned under a different name. Essentially, she was using company funds to promote herself, not the business. Lavish wine influencer parties, brand launches that had nothing to do with our core values. It was all there, on paper. I took a breath, then asked the auditor to keep digging. She uncovered inconsistencies in HR reports, especially in the way staff resignations were being processed. Several employees hadn't resigned, they'd been pressured out and replaced by Carla's friends or contacts. At that point I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the integrity of the company my grandfather built. And if no one else was going to protect it, I would. I gathered everything, documents, screenshots, statements. I built a timeline of every shady move Carla had made since the day my father fell ill. I wasn't planning to explode all this in public. That would damage the company more than it would help me. But I was building leverage, truthful, powerful leverage. Because when the time came, I wasn't going to ask for my position back. I was going to make it undeniable that I was the only person who ever deserved it. I waited for the right moment. And when it came, I didn't hesitate. It was the 70th anniversary of Bennett Cellars. Carla turned it into a spectacle. Lavish decorations, influencers flown in from LA, a jazz band, even branded cocktail napkins with her initials. Not once was my grandfather's name mentioned. Not once did anyone acknowledge the roots of what built this company. The night was dripping in ego. Carla walked around in a designer gown like a movie star, greeting guests as if she owned the legacy. Photographers followed her every move. I stood in the back, dressed simply, quiet, invisible to most. But I wasn't there for attention. I was there for the truth. Right before her keynote speech, I stepped outside and handed a sealed folder to one of the board members, Mr. Ellison, my grandfather's oldest friend. "Please read this before she speaks," I whispered. He gave me a confused look, but opened it. Inside was everything: the fraudulent payments, the staffing lies, the photos, the event invoices, and a copy of the LLC registration Carla had hidden under a fake name. A full timeline with dates and signatures, proof so clear it didn't need interpretation. He didn't say a word, just stood up and walked backstage. Minutes later, as Carla took the mic, her face lit up with performance. She began talking about vision, reinvention, and legacy through innovation. And then, just as the room leaned in to applaud, Mr. Ellison stepped forward and interrupted. "Before we continue, I believe everyone here deserves to know the full truth about who's been running this company." Gasps. Silence. Carla's smile froze. He turned to her. "Carla, you've misused company funds, manipulated staffing, and compromised the very values we were built on." She stammered. Denied. Tried to laugh it off. But then other board members stood up, documents in hand. Whispers turned into questions. Questions turned into facts. The illusion cracked and fell apart, right there under the chandeliers. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply watched the truth do what I couldn't do alone. Speak louder than any lie. By the end of the night, Carla had left through a side door. Alone. And for the first time in months, people looked me in the eye again. Some nodded, a few apologized. Mr. Ellison placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Your grandfather would have been proud." I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. But I felt seen, and that was the beginning of everything. I didn't walk back into Bennett Cellars with a speech. I walked in with a plan. 2 weeks after the anniversary event, the board called an emergency meeting. This time, I sat at the table. Not at the end, not in the corner, but directly across from the chair reserved for the company's president. No one tried to stop me. Carla didn't show up. She resigned via email the night after the truth came out. There was no apology, just a formal statement and a carefully worded exit. But I wasn't interested in revenge. I wasn't here to humiliate her or anyone else. What I cared about now was restoration. I presented the findings from the audit again, this time with solutions. I laid out a new code of ethics, a clear hiring policy, a streamlined vendor approval process. I proposed rebuilding trust from the ground up, with transparency, fair leadership, and a return to the values that had made Bennett Sellers a legacy in the first place. I thought there would be pushback. Instead, I saw heads nodding. People who had once doubted me now leaned forward, listening. Not because I demanded respect, but because I earned it. And then the chair of the board, Mr. Ellison, turned to me and said, "Effective immediately, we'd like you to take over as interim CEO." I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just took a breath and said, "Only if we do this right, together." Later that evening, I visited my father. He was thinner now, tired, wrapped in blankets, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in weeks. I sat beside him and took his hand. "They offered me the CEO role," I said. He looked at me, his voice low. "You deserve it. You always have. I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner." I didn't need the apology, but I needed the moment, the truth, the recognition not just as his daughter, but as a leader. We sat there quietly, fingers intertwined, surrounded by the hum of machines and the scent of old wine still clinging to his skin. That night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt responsible. Because leadership isn't about winning battles. It's about honoring the people who came before you while protecting those who come after. It's been a year since I officially took over as CEO of Bennett Sellers. Some days I still walk the vineyards at dawn just like my father used to. I run my fingers across the vines, breathe in the scent of damp soil, and remind myself that leadership doesn't live in boardrooms. It lives in moments like these. In choices. In care. The first few months weren't easy. Rebuilding trust takes time. Some clients had doubts, some employees were hesitant, but I didn't blame them. I just showed up every day and did the work. We brought back our small batch collection. We hosted open house weekends where longtime workers got to tell the story of how each wine came to be. We cut unnecessary PR expenses and reinvested in sustainable farming and fair wages. Slowly, people started to believe again, not just in the brand, but in the spirit behind it. My father passed away quietly 3 months ago. I was with him when he took his last breath. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "You brought it back." That's all he said. That's all he needed to say. At his memorial, I didn't give a speech. I just opened a bottle from the 1985 Reserve, his favorite year, and poured a glass for every guest. We raised a toast under the same oak tree where he used to sit with my grandfather. And in that moment I knew the family name was safe. Not because it was carved into a label, but because it was alive. In every person we treated with dignity, in every honest harvest, in every step we took forward without forgetting where we came from. As for Carla, she moved to Oregon, bought a small event company. I don't hate her. I don't think about her much, to be honest. Some people spend their whole lives chasing spotlight. Me? I found peace in the roots. This company, my family's name, doesn't need to scream to be heard. It just needs to speak with truth and walk with grace. And now it does.